Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Senator Schatz, and good to see you again, Mr. Secretary. I do want to follow up here where we left off earlier in this morning's Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing, and I did hear your exchange with Senator Murray, where you indicated that in the middle of a conflict, it would be difficult to reach any final conclusions about whether or not U.S. weapons were used in violation of international humanitarian law. I would just point out that there are many other conflicts where we are able to quickly make and do issue those kind of judgments. But what I don't think is complicated at all is if you look at the period of time from October 7th, the terrible Hamas October 7th attacks, to the present, I don't think it's complicated to conclude that the Netanyahu government has complied with international norms with respect to the delivery of humanitarian assistance along that continuum of time. Is it your testimony today that the Netanyahu government has complied with international norms when it comes to delivering humanitarian assistance to desperate people in Gaza since October 7th till today?
I think there's been a huge gap between stated intent and actual results, and that's a gap that we've been trying to close every single day. And I think that's what we've been seeing for many months.
Mr. Secretary, I get that. Obviously my question was whether or not there's been a violation of international norms, which I think to any person with eyes to see and ears to hear, there have been. And as you know, there are many people in the U.S. government who have reached similar conclusions, and actually it's been well reported on. So I think that does hurt our credibility when we're not able to make that clear call. Let me move on to the issue where we were in agreement, I think, this morning.
What we just witnessed in the exchange between Senator Van Gallen and Secretary Blinken was a rare moment of accountability regarding how Washington is handling the Israel-Gaza crisis. Van Gallen didn't hold back, pressing Blinken hard on whether Israel has followed international standards in providing humanitarian aid since October 7th. This wasn't just a theoretical debate, it was about real people in Gaza, families struggling, without food, water, or medical supplies, trapped in a conflict that seems endless. Van Gallen cut through the political noise, demanding answers. Has Netanyahu's government met its obligations under international law? Or has it crossed a line? While Blinken tried to remain diplomatic, the pressure was unmistakable. The message was clear: if the U.S. wants to remain a credible advocate for peace, it cannot ignore when an ally violates the very principles it claims to support.
Which is that it's in our national security interest to have a durable end to the conflict in Gaza and to the larger Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and that we can only achieve security and self-determination and dignity and justice for Israelis and Palestinians alike by securing a normalization of relations with Israel and Saudi Arabia and other states, as well as a clear plan, I think you said time-bound plan, to establish a Palestinian state. Am I paraphrasing that fairly?
That's correct.
And you agree that it's not possible to achieve a secure and just end to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict by jumping over the equities of the Palestinian people. Is that right?
Absolutely not. That's impossible. It would be self-defeating.
I want to emphasize that point because you know, Mr. Secretary, you've been around Washington for a long time, because it has been fashionable in some foreign policy circles to believe that you could do that you could somehow achieve peace and stability and security by jumping over the Palestinian issue. So, and I want to emphasize this because you have said that the Saudis are insistent on a clear path to a Palestinian state and time-bound path, but it's also in our national security interest. So are we also insistent on that?
Yes, we are. And again, it's interesting and I think instructive to note that perhaps the two most vicious and vociferous enemies of a two-state solution are Hamas and Iran. That should tell you something, and it also should tell you what a rebuke to both Hamas and Iran it would be if we could finally get on this pathway in a credible and time-bound way. And I think certainly everything we've heard from the Saudis in the context of having these normalization discussions, makes it clear that they feel the same way.
Let's be clear, America's credibility in the Middle East is on the line, and it's taking serious damage. When the U.S. fails to consistently demand adherence to international norms, especially in providing humanitarian aid to Gaza, it sends a dangerous message that our values can be bent for certain allies. This isn't just a moral failing, it's a strategic one. Senators are making it clear that peace in the region isn't a vague goal. It's a matter of national security. A lasting solution requires more than temporary ceasefires or behind-the-scenes diplomacy. It needs normalization of relations with Israel and, importantly, a clear, time-bound plan for a Palestinian state. This isn't just what Palestinians want, it's a red line for Saudi Arabia, and more people are seeing it as a key step for lasting peace. Without a clear roadmap, we're trapped in a cycle of violence, outrage, and political paralysis while American influence continues to shrink.
Well, I'm glad you raised that, because there is one other party, right, in addition to the two that you mentioned, that has been dead set against a Palestinian state and a two-state solution. In December of 2022, just the day before the new Netanyahu government was sworn in, Netanyahu issued a list of priorities for this new, very extreme government. And I'm quoting one of his guiding principles was, the Jewish people have an exclusive and inalienable right to all parts of the land of Israel, meaning including all the West Bank. So I want to read to you something else that now Prime Minister Netanyahu said back in 2019 at a Likud meeting, and this has been well reported, and I quote, "Anyone who wants to prevent the creation of a Palestinian state needs to support strengthening Hamas. This is part of our strategy to divide the Palestinians between those in Gaza and those in Judea and Samaria," end quote. So, Mr. Secretary, you mentioned some of the other opponents of a two-state solution. And it's absolutely true that Hamas believes in one state, right? Their despicable endgame is one state where they wipe out the state of Israel, right? And so can you be really clear as to why Prime Minister Netanyahu is simply misrepresenting the case when he says that a Palestinian state and a two-state solution would be, quote, a reward for Hamas? Isn't it exactly the opposite?
I believe it's exactly the opposite. Now, of course, a Palestinian state has to come with the necessary security guarantees for Israel.
Senator Van Golland just highlighted one of the most uncomfortable questions in U.S. foreign policy. What exactly is Netanyahu's endgame in Gaza? During a tense exchange with Secretary Blinken, Van Golland raised a provocative theory: what if Netanyahu, intentionally or not, is empowering Hamas to prevent any serious progress toward a Palestinian state? Let's be real, it's a question that must be asked. After months of intense military action and a humanitarian disaster, the idea that weakening Hamas is the only goal doesn't seem to hold up anymore. What if chaos is the objective? What if keeping Hamas as a constant threat gives Netanyahu the political cover to block statehood while claiming there's no peace partner? That's not just cynical, it's dangerously short-sighted. Van Golland's questioning forces the Biden administration to face whether it's supporting a strategy that undermines the very two-state solution it claims to back.
No one wants to see a state emerge that would become a threat to Israel. And I think there are effective ways to make sure that that doesn't happen. But yes, to your point, again, I think the biggest rebuke to Hamas and to Iran would be the realization of a Palestinian state alongside a Jewish and democratic Israel.
And I agree with you 100%, Mr. Secretary. I just want us to be clear-eyed about all the forces that are arrayed against us. Part of the effort to undermine the PA, or the two-state solution, has been undermining the Palestinian Authority. As you know, Finance Minister Smotrich has been withholding funds for the PA, which is weakening the PA and creating an even more unstable security situation on the West Bank. Today, Ben-Gvir talked about reoccupying Gaza. He said he'd like to live in Gaza. So this is today reported. So my question, Mr. Secretary, is what are we willing to do when people like Finance Minister Smotrich hold up funds for the PA, weakening security? And at what point do we say that our continued support is contingent on more cooperation?
I think if you ask the Israeli security forces, whether it's the intelligence forces, Shin Bet, whether it's the IDF, they will tell you that the PA plays an absolutely critical, essential role in trying to preserve security and stability in the West Bank. They do it in an incredibly difficult environment precisely because they're constantly being starved for funds. They're doing work that's actually vital to Israel's security. And so it's manifestly against the interests of Israel, and it's against our own interests to see the PA undermined in the fashion that some are attempting to undermine it. Second, in terms of governance going forward,
Secretary Blinken was just pressed on a question that strikes at the heart of U.S. foreign policy hypocrisy. Will America finally tie its support for Israel to humanitarian cooperation and real political accountability? With Gaza on the brink and the West Bank tense, the pressure is building. Officials like Israeli Finance Minister Smotrich are making matters worse by actively blocking aid and destabilizing the region. This isn't just about humanitarian aid, it's about whether the U.S. is willing to back up its words with action. You can't keep sending military aid while Israeli ministers work to undermine the Palestinian Authority and fuel chaos in the West Bank. Blinken's responses have been measured, but lawmakers' question is clear. How long can the U.S. continue to write blank checks while its ally undermines the very stability that American policy claims to support?
it's imperative that not only the conflict in Gaza end as soon as possible, but that Israel come forward with a clear plan for how Gaza is going to be governed, secured, redeveloped, because the trajectory we're on right now in the absence of such a plan is either Israel stays and occupies Gaza, which is unacceptable to us and should be unacceptable to them because they'll be inheriting an insurgency that will bleed them for a long time. Or if they're not going to do it, then Hamas will come back, and we've seen already in areas that have been cleared, in quotation marks, by Israel, the return in some cases of Hamas. Or you'll simply have anarchy, lawlessness, which we see in most parts of Gaza right now. And that eventually will be filled almost certainly by something bad, even worse than the lawlessness. So there's an absolute imperative for that. We believe strongly that, of course, Palestinians must be governing themselves, whether it's in Gaza, whether it's the West Bank, and whether it's ultimately, of course, in a Palestinian state. And right now, for all of its deficiencies and challenges, the Palestinian Authority is the best vehicle for that. They have a new prime minister. They have a new government. They have a reform plan which needs to be implemented. In our own engagements with the prime minister, he struck us as someone who is serious and focused on actually trying to reform the PA so it's responsive to the needs of people and that it roots out corruption. But of course, if it has no resources to work with, it's going to be impossible to do the job. So we are at this constantly, including trying to make sure that the revenues that the PA is entitled to actually get to the PA.
Thank you, and I do think this is sort of the last gasp the coming year for a two-state solution, and it's going to require strong U.S. leadership. Thank you. Thank you.
Let's get to the point. If Israel wants long-term security and any chance at regional stability, it needs to lay out a real plan for Gaza once the fighting stops. Right now, a dangerous void is forming. Without a clear strategy for governance, security, and development, that void will either be filled by Hamas again or spiral into complete chaos. This isn't just a local issue, it's a global one. And this is where the U.S. needs to lead, not just with words, but with action. Supporting a reformed Palestinian Authority isn't optional, it's essential. Washington can't keep treating the two-state solution like it's a distant dream. If the U.S. is serious about peace, it must use its influence to push both sides toward a lasting solution. That means conditioning aid, enforcing accountability, and facing the uncomfortable reality that without political vision, this cycle of violence will never end. What do you think? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. The next one is even more controversial.